for the community hearing session. My name's Tammy Swift-Adams. I'm a reporter with the Scottish Government's Planning and Environmental Appeals Division. We're commonly known as DPEA. I've been appointed by the Scottish Ministers to conduct this inquiry and prepare a report of my findings and recommendation. The DPEA case reference for this case is WIN-110-4. You can use that reference if you're looking up documents for the inquiry on our DPEA website, or if you want to re-look at recordings of these sessions on the DPEA webcast website. Can I just check that people can hear me well enough? You can? That's great, even up in the balcony. Grand. I'll try and... This session of the inquiry is focused on hearing from community representatives and members of the public who have prepared statements which they're going to read out. I'd like to thank tonight's speakers for preparing those statements and submitting them in advance, and I'd like to thank everyone who's come this evening to observe the session too. This inquiry is being live streamed on the DPEA website. A recording of each day's events will also be available to view there afterwards. By participating tonight, you're consenting to that recording and to the recording being used and made accessible to members of the public. We use that for webcasting and training purposes and keeping a record. Two of tonight's participants, Tim Sibley, who you'll see here to my left, and Sue Patterson, have provided audio-visual equipment which some of the speakers are going to use to show slides and videos to illustrate their statements. To make more space for observers tonight, I've put more public seating in, so we haven't got our big horseshoe arrangement that we've had for the other inquiry sessions, which means I'll have a slight change of approach to the running order that I sent out to the speakers for this session earlier. Instead of two big groups swapping over a midway break, I'm going to call groups of speakers forward in small groups. We'll still take a break in the middle. So as each speaker or group finishes, you can just return to a seat in the observers or speakers section, and I'll let people know who's up next. I'm not expecting to have a lot of questions tonight because the statements came in advance and because they're all quite clear, and I want to make most of our time today focused on listening to the speakers. Some of the statements that we'll hear tonight have raised some issues or questions which I have incorporated into the agendas for other sessions, particularly the policy and conditions hearing sessions, which we're going to have later this week. Okay. A couple of housekeeping points just before we get on with business. Firstly, if you've got phones or devices with you, if you could make sure those are, if they're not off, could you make sure they're on silent? And that's just so that we don't interrupt the speakers when they're in mid-flow. There's fire exits to my right and at the back of the room behind the seating. We're not expecting a fire alarm. The loos are in the hallway where you came in, gents on the ground floor, an accessible loo, and ladies upstairs. We're not using the kitchen, but I've put out some water flasks on the speaker's table and on a table right at the back of the room, so it might get quite warm with so many of us in here this evening. I'd encourage those of you who are here to observe to treat all of the speakers with equal respect, even if you hear some things that you don't agree with. Speaking in public can be very daunting. These community hearing sessions, people quite often want to give a round of applause for the speakers. If you could do that as speakers are switching over places, that would really help us just to keep the momentum up. I know it's not always easy to regulate that, but if you could, that would help. I'm going to get the speakers to get going very shortly. When you're up at the speakers' desks, if you could switch your microphone on so it shows red like mine does when you're speaking. Either of the buttons, I think, will work, but if you just use the one nearest to you, the same button will switch you off again. If you could remember to switch that off when you finish speaking, that'll mean we catch the next person properly on the recording. My IT colleague can switch people off if you forget yourself, so don't worry too much. And if you're switched off, that's why. We need to finish at 9:30 today. Hopefully we'll get through everybody by then. I'm sure we will. And then we do have to get clear of the hall quite quickly for the hall keeper needs to lock it up. if I do need to interrupt speakers, I'll try not to, but if I do, if you could just move to a closing statement, then we'll move on to the next speaker. And the full written statements are on the DPA website. I've already read those, and members of the public can see those too if you want to review what you've heard. So with all that in mind, I'm going to ask the first speaker to read their statement. And we're hearing today first from Alexander Burnett, who is in position. Over to you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at today's community session. And let me be clear from the outset, I am not opposed to renewable energy. Quite the opposite, I've long championed the shift to cleaner energy and believe passionately in a balanced energy mix. And at this point, I should declare my register of interest regarding renewables, which includes biomass district heating networks and being the trustee of a farm with two 12-kilowatt turbines. However, this proposal for 16 turbines, some reaching 200 metres in height, on a hill already 300 metres above the surrounding landscape, would make it one of the tallest onshore wind farms in the UK. These turbines would dominate the skyline, visible from Murray to Angus, disrupting historic views and local heritage sites. This is not a fair trade-off. If approved, it would be the first of its kind on Royal Deeside, setting a precedent that will unleash a flood of industrial developments. A ring of steel that would permanently scar this iconic landscape, and with it severely threaten tourism and the 1 million visitors Aberdeenshire's post-oil economic strategy will rely on. Now, today's session rightly focuses on community. So while others will speak to the technical failings of this proposal, its limited carbon savings, the threat to private water supplies, the impact on wildlife habitats, the disruption to peatland, and the considerable noise pollution, I want to focus on the democratic deficit that has existed throughout this process. In nearly a decade as an MSP, I have never received more correspondence than on this single issue. Local opposition has been consistent and overwhelming. A community survey in 2023 showed that only 11% of residents supported this proposal. Furthermore, there have been over 1,500 formal objections to the proposal, and the same number again of informal objections to my office. All 6 community councils have resoundingly rejected this proposal, as has Aberdeenshire Council on 4 separate occasions. At every level of elected representation, this project has been opposed, and the community's anger could not be clearer. So if such a weight of opposition has no impact on the decision, then the entire process of objecting and public inquiries should be scrapped, and people told not to waste their time and energy trying to protect their communities. Local voices have been repeatedly sidelined, and it has taken a monumental effort for residents to fight this proposal against an avalanche of publicity by RES trying to bribe the community with paltry amounts of community benefit, and brazenly saying they had listened to the concerns by removing just 1 turbine from the original proposal. Now, this proposal has never been about tackling climate change. For Danect Estate and RES, this is an opportunity to generate significant financial returns. Over the lifetime of this project, it is estimated that RES will receive 1.2 billion in revenue, whilst Danect Estate will receive over 260 million in rent. There has been no effort to quantify the significant economic losses to households and businesses that will undoubtedly be affected by the industrialisation of our natural landscape. Landowners on Royal Deeside have always been aware of their role as custodians of the land and the importance of protecting the landscape, a principle that has now been shamefully abandoned. So I urge the inquiry to listen to the passionate submissions and speeches made by members of a local community who are desperately trying to protect their community and livelihoods, not just from this proposal, but the precedent that will inevitably follow if this is approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Burnett. Mr. Burnett mentioned the community councils, and we're going to hear from them next. So if the 6 representatives could come up and and take your seats. I'll give you a moment to settle. Thank you very much, and I think it's you first, Mr. Argyle.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Mum. My name is Peter Argyle, Chair of Tuffins Community Council. I was a member of Aberdeenshire Council for 23 years, for 12 of which I was Chair of the committee responsible for its planning function. Tuffins Community Council's objection to this application is based on comprehensive residence surveys undertaken jointly by the 6 community councils in 2022 and 2023. The first showed that 71% were opposed to the development and just 11% in favour across the 6 community council areas. The second, following RES's attempts to allay community concerns at public exhibitions, showed that opposition had grown to 75%. The sample size gives data which are robust and meaningful. We worked closely with Hofwig, who have shown huge commitment in providing the evidence base to underpin this overwhelming community objection. To be clear, all 6 community councils wholeheartedly endorse Hofwig's work. We would not have done so had the community's response been otherwise. RES claims to be the world's largest independent renewable energy company, with a parent company that produced revenue of 1.1 billion in 2023, with net assets valued at over 500 million. The application site is on Dunecht Estates, a massive property of 53,000 acres owned by the family of Viscount Cowdray. The 6 community councils receive annual grants ranging between £562 and £1,203. With the playing field so far from level, we are grateful for this opportunity to be heard. Hofwig relies entirely on voluntary support and donations in cash or kind. No public funds are available to support its work. In this David and Goliath situation, the planning system is all that stands between communities and powerful, well-resourced entities bringing forward inappropriate development proposals. To be clear, our communities view this as an utterly inappropriate proposal. It includes wind turbines of up to 200 metres, located on a prominent hill of the greatest amenity value, a hill intimately surrounded by some 10,000 residents. The significant negative landscape and visual impacts would be felt by those living in 6 community council areas and those represented by 3 of Aberdeenshire Council's area committees. This alone demonstrates that the massive negative impacts are not localised and cannot be mitigated through project design. The scale of this development and the size of the population impacted by it is probably unique in Scotland. It is hard to think of another case where turbines of this size would be located so close to a significant population base or where site selection has been so fundamentally flawed. My colleagues will discuss our concerns in detail. My purpose is simply to set out that opposition to this development locally is overwhelming and support is minimal. We would emphasise the hugely damaging consequences this unnecessary development would have on the 10,000 people we represent, living with a close physical and emotional connection to the Hill of Fare. The negligible environmental or net economic benefits do not even begin to outweigh these consequences. Although NPF4 is supportive of onshore wind energy, the Scottish Government has produced guidance in line with its just transition principles, which expects developers to engage at an early stage on community benefit. Despite inviting the developer to discuss this important matter, there has been no engagement whatsoever with any of the community councils here today. Instead, we've been presented with a completely unacceptable fait accompli. This application has been overshadowing our communities for 3 years. We firmly believe our objections are supported by adopted, up-to-date planning policy, and are hoping our voices will be heard by those who constitute the only defence we have against a poorly located, overbearing and utterly inappropriate development proposed by powerful interests. And having sat through several days of this public inquiry, I'm confident our voices will be heard. Thank you, Mum.
Thank you very much. Mr. Morris is speaking next, and I think you have a video as part of your... There it is. Okay, I've angled this towards all of you, but I'll turn around and watch that too. Okay, over to you, Mr. Morris.
Good evening, ma'am. I'm David Morris, and a member of the Crathes, Drumoak and Durris Community Council. We're working, as you've just heard, with the other community councils here today to represent the thousands of people most affected by this proposal. I'll talk about the visual impact of the proposed wind farm, which is in conflict with planning guidance, the determinations of Aberdeenshire Council, and the majority views of local communities. To the south of the Hill of Fare, the settlements of Inchmarlow, Bankery, Crathes and Drumoak sit in the Dee Valley Special Landscape Area. And we are more or less bounded to the north and south by the Grampian outliers, which run like fingers from the mountains to the sea. The Hill of Fare is particularly prominent, and a backdrop to the spectacular views enjoyed by tourists entering Royal Deeside via the famous Kenner Mountain slug roads. The ground rises as we go anti-clockwise around the hill to the north towards Echt, Midmar and Torfins. Some of the residents here are even closer to the proposed wind farm, both from a height and distance perspective, where this proposal feels like a very personal affront. When we look out of our windows and step into our countryside, our views are these hills. Our home is wrapped in their beauty. Their presence gives us a feel of the Grampian Mountains close by. This is where we live. These hills give us a sense of place and a sense of home. Living in the valleys, we feel protection, not threat from these hills. There is a peace and a beauty which, of course, also brings tourism and welcome visitors. We have planning guidance to point us towards appropriate development, but also away from the inappropriate. NFP4 Policy 4 Natural Places maintains the importance of protecting natural assets against unacceptable impacts. Aberdeenshire's Local Plan 2023 highlights the Dee Valley Special Landscape Area, from 70% of which this proposed wind farm will be visible. Nature Scott's guidance for siting and designing wind farms states, narrow bands of uplands between settled and smaller scale valleys should be avoided. Aberdeenshire Council's 2023 Landscape Sensitivity Assessment states for the Hill of Fare, a high-quality, high-value landscape sensitive to erosion of character from wind energy development of all scales beyond a domestic height turbine. How on earth did this proposal even go beyond the idea stage? But it did, and it went out for consultation, and our views were made clear. You've just heard from Peter Argyle about the Community Council questionnaires. Of the 40 or so issues raised by the community, visual impact was an overwhelming concern. And despite clear local opposition, the proposal progressed to a planning application. So here we are, with the entirely predictable material objections bringing us to this inquiry. Consequently, this DPA-managed process raised thousands more public representations. These heavily emphasise the significant and unacceptable visual impacts on the landscape, local communities and visitor experience. Aberdeenshire is no stranger to wind farms, and the Council's experienced planning officers can be trusted to recognise what is inappropriate, as they have done in this case. Given this, together with the public representations, we fail to understand how we find ourselves here today with this development still in front of us. I'm sure everybody, whether they live here or not, is imagining how they would feel if they'd see these wind turbines, enormous turbines towering above where they live. In size, they're in the same order of magnitude as the hill itself. And one thing that can never be mitigated is the obvious prominence of the Hill of Fare in our landscape. Of course we object to this entirely inappropriate proposal. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Ms. Bick is going to speak next.
My name is Fiona Bick, Chair of Ecton Skene Community Council. I'm going to focus on the adverse impacts the wind farm would have on public access and amenity. The landscape and visual impacts of this wind farm on users of the Deeside Way, nearby cycle road routes and Aberdeenshire core paths were considered by the applicant in Chapter 6 of the EIA, but what has been completely ignored is the fact that the Hill of Fare is a magnet for hill walkers and mountain bikers in its own right. Walk Highlands is a website used by outdoor enthusiasts as inspiration for their forays into the countryside. The site is used by hospitality businesses in Banchory and elsewhere to advertise their services. 3 routes featuring the summit plateau and peaks of Hill of Fare are detailed on its site. Walk Highlands also describes routes up Barmacon Hill and Scolty Hill, with fine views of the Hill of Fare being key features from these as well. Another way to illustrate the current amenity value of Hill of Fare is the heat map available on the Strava website. This shows in orange the walking and cycling routes recorded by Strava app users over the last 12 months. Darker colours indicate the heaviest usage, but this is only a small sample of those who actually visit the hill. Many of the objections to the development mention the writer's personal use of the hill for outdoor access. The developer proposes to upgrade the existing hill tracks for turbine access. These are the exact same tracks that people currently use for recreation. For the long years of the construction phase, the public will effectively be prohibited from the summit plateau and the woods at the east end of the hill by the site entrance. And after construction, the landscape and visual impacts on Hill of Fare users will be immense. The visualisation from Meikle Tap illustrates the major significant impact on only one route. And this doesn't even show the battery storage and substation, which were omitted from the picture. After construction, 11 of the 16 turbines will be within 200 metres of today's most popular routes. You can see that many of the turbines will be directly on or adjacent to them. When the wind farm's operational, the noise will destroy the previous piece, and there'll be an ongoing risk of falling objects for those that venture out. The battery facility also presents new risks. Lithium-ion batteries pose a significant fire risk. Part of the battery site will be on deep peat. There's the potential for escalation to a major moorland and forestry fire, resulting in huge environmental damage. In the event of fire, access to the BESS, the battery, will be difficult for Scottish Fire and Rescue given its remote location. There's no firewater available on site. There's no firewater provision included in the plans. In June, nearly 30,000 acres of Murray and Speyside moorland were burnt in wildfires, showing how easily things escalate. Residents and tourists alike visit the Hill of Fare to experience a wild and natural place with wonderful views of the surrounding landscape. They experience peace and quiet. They can observe the varied wildlife, including many raptors that live and hunt there. The applicant's short bird surveys recorded golden eagle, red kite, goshawk, merlin, osprey, hen harrier. The hen harrier is a red list bird. The osprey is on the amber list. Red kites are only there because of a successful reintroduction programme in the 2000s. Yet all of these birds face being sacrificed. And the qualities that draw people to the hill right now will be utterly destroyed by this development, robbing the community of a popular and highly valued green space and natural resource. It's no wonder it's stirred up such significant local opposition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Patterson.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Sue Patterson and I'm Vice Chair of the Banchory Community Council. Banchory is the largest community affected by the proposed Hill of Fare wind farm. With a population of around 7,500, it's the hub for a much wider rural area, providing education, healthcare, and local jobs. What happens to Banchory affects a much larger area. In 2024, we worked closely with residents to create a local place plan. It revealed a town with real economic strengths, but also real vulnerabilities. Today, 3 sectors provide most of our employment. Tourism, with jobs in retail, accommodation and food, provide about 950 jobs locally. That's 36% of all jobs. Health and education services provide 575 jobs, and oil and gas-related professions, 390 jobs. Whilst tourism and rural services are thriving, the decline of the oil and gas sector puts hundreds of skilled local jobs at risk. This is a time of economic transition for Banchory, and we need to get it right. But this wind farm does not offer that path. The developer themselves estimate just 19 long-term jobs across the whole of Aberdeenshire, not in Banchory and not enough to matter. Worse still, we believe this development threatens what does matter, our tourism economy and the very identity of the town. Tourism is deeply rooted in Banchory's natural beauty, its walking trails, its scenic views, and its sense of place. But this wind farm would put 200-metre turbines on the skyline, visible from trails, from town, from homes. It would industrialise an area people come to for peace and nature. Through our local place plan, the message from the community was very clear. They want Banchory to be a sustainable, nature-based and attractive place to live and work. And this wind farm is simply out of character with that vision. We also have serious concerns about the democratic process. The community has spoken, and loudly. But because this proposal is being assessed under the Electricity Act, people feel ignored. The local development framework, the one shaped by the community, is being bypassed, and that is not democracy. Even our local school children get it. One young person told us, "It feels like the people far away who need the power have all the say, and the views of local people do not matter." We agree. This is a pivotal moment for Banchory. We're not against renewables. We're not against change. But this wind farm threatens real, lasting harm to local jobs, to people's well-being, to nature, to the landscape, and to the confidence our community has in the system that's meant to protect it. On behalf of our residents, our families, workers, young people, we respectfully ask that you refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Murray.
Good evening, Ma'am. I'm Frank Murray. I'm chair of the Clooney Midmar Monymusk Community Council and a member of the Hill of Fare Wind Information Group. My interests and justifiable anger were aroused at an RES consultation in Midmar. I asked Mr. Stuart Young, factor for Dunnex Estates, what they would do if the private water supplies were affected by the construction of the wind farm. He replied, "That's RES's problem," and promptly walked away. I next asked an RES representative what they would do if the private water supplies were affected. He replied, "Oh well, we'd bring you a bottle of water." Mr. Gavin Shirley, the project manager, was present at that consultation. There are circa 300 people, 150 homes, farms and businesses that are totally reliant on pure drinking water from the Hill of Fare. West of Echt, there is no mains water to outlying areas. Loss of water could be catastrophic. Without water, homes would be valueless, farms and businesses could not exist. RES have chosen to locate 5 borrow pits, actually quarries, along the north face of the hill in close proximity to the Midmar private water supply sources. RES do not know how the blasting and associated works will affect the private water supplies, nor do they care. They are playing Russian roulette with our lives and livelihoods. The hazards posed by uranium contamination have not been included in the RES Environmental Impact Assessment report. Consequently, none of the consultees are aware of the uranium and have not commented. RES have not offered to conduct any private water supply testing, nor have they investigated any contingency planning. Midmar Community Council offered to organise water samples from private water supplies to be analysed for uranium content. Normal water analysis does not include uranium. 50 private water supply owners responded in order to establish a baseline for their uranium content. In discussions with the private water supply owners, there was palpable concern, very real feelings of anger, frustration and fear were evident. And some people felt simply powerless, unheard, overwhelmed by events beyond their control. One widowed lady cannot sleep at night and is prone to bursting into tears when she thinks about the massive injustice which is being wrought upon our community and her own vulnerability. In discussions with Scottish Water, I established that there are no contingency plans to install water mains beyond the present termination points of Echt and Tillyburlock. Scottish Water informed me that the pressures at these termination points was very low, less than 1 bar. They stated that homes beyond these points cannot physically receive mains water, the pressure is too low. To provide mains water would require a new pumping station to be built and miles of mains water pipes to be laid, plus individual connections to outlying homes, farms and businesses. This would take years to implement. What happens to those people, those homes, farms and businesses, and who pays? Finally, a quote from a meeting of the Cree Indian Nation chiefs in the late 1800s. Only when the last tree has died, the last river polluted, and the last fish is caught, will we realise we cannot eat money. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. And Mr. Harrington, please.
Good evening, my name is Paul Harrington and I am the chairman of Inchmarlow, Brathens and Glasgow Community Council, which is located immediately south of Fair. I am the last of the Community Council speakers and want to draw together the major issues mentioned which weigh against this flawed proposal and to do that in socio-economic terms. We've heard about the project's overbearing visual impact, both day and at night, affecting a very large and highly populated scenic area, the loss of recreational amenity, the catastrophic risk to private water supplies, and the vulnerability of our local economy at a time when oil and gas jobs are being lost and we need to grow our tourism sector. By their own assessment, RES conclude the proposal will bring insignificant benefit to the local and Scottish economy. There would be negligible long-term value brought to our community and little or no job creation. There is widespread community objection to profits accruing to an absentee landowner and an international developer. There is also real concern that due to curtailment, the project will add further to consumer bills through additional constraint payments. Balanced against the project's insignificant benefits, we must consider the major issues our community would have to bear. Not only is the visual impact unacceptable in its own right, but it is greatly compounded by the heavily populated nature of the surrounding countryside. An estimated 45,000 residents live within 15 kilometres of the proposal. Considering asset values, which are a key aspect of local amenity, common sense dictates that constructing an industrial-scale wind farm next to a property will reduce its value. The London School of Economics has quantified this effect and found property price reductions extending to around 15 kilometres that on their own can be expected to negate the project's value. There are already local cases of purchasers walking away from properties due to this proposal. Turning to tourism, RES naively concludes the impact will be negligible. However, their own key reference confirms that man-made structures like wind turbines reduce the attractiveness of a landscape, inevitably reducing tourist demand and leading to a loss of income and jobs, quote unquote. This proposal will dominate views from the major tourist routes like the A93 D-side corridor, the A944 Highland tourist route, and the B9119, which passes the Sun Honey and Christchurch Stone Circles and the Barbican of Echt Hill Fort. The National Trust for Scotland, custodians of many properties in the region, reinforce these same points in their objection. No attempt has been made by RES to properly describe, far less to quantify the local impact, which we would conclude will be substantial. As one local representation summarised, tourists come to Aberdeenshire for its scenic beauty, not to look at 200-metre wind turbines. In conclusion, RES's own assessment demonstrates the project would bring negligible long-term economic benefit. When we consider the profound and unmitigated negative impacts on our landscape, tourism and asset base, this project can be expected to destroy value. As the first of a potential series of applications, this proposal risks starting a cumulative and compounding destruction of the landscape value of the D-side corridor and surrounding area, making it a far less attractive place to live, work and to visit. It is clear that this project should never have been brought forward in the first place and has placed an unacceptable burden on the limited resources of our local community. For these critical reasons, we firmly believe the Hill of Fair wind farm proposal should be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Thank you all for speaking. And the next group of speakers will be Alan McLean, Angela Funk, Colette Backwell for Burt McIntosh and Cameron McLean. Thank you. I was going to start with Alan McLean. Is that you? Good.
Well, first of all, ma'am, I'd like to say that I made a big effort for you tonight. My wife says it's the first time she's seen me out in my joggers and my t-shirt since I retired. So thank you for the opportunity to speak in opposition to this application. There is extensive evidence presented from expert witnesses on behalf of all parties involved, but I and my fellow residents that oppose this application are expert witnesses too, because if the application is granted, we will witness and have to live with firsthand the irreversible damage and destruction that will occur. There may be irreversible damage that cannot be mitigated to our water supplies, rendering our homes uninhabitable. There will be irreversible damage to the habitat that supports all the flora and fauna that exists in the Hill of Fair, not just by the turbines, but by all the associated infrastructure required, such as battery storage, pylons, road network, and so on. There are so many reasons why we object to the proposed development, but the major concern we have are the risks to our private water supply due to loss of supply and/or contamination. If either of these were to happen, not only would it render our home to be uninhabitable, but also unsellable. At this stage in our lives, we would not be able to start again. We would not have the funds to start again. Although we tried to engage constructively with RES, almost all of our correspondences we sent regarding our concerns were not answered. This was despite assurances at the public exhibitions the company wanted to engage with communities. We were told at the public exhibitions by RES in response to our concerns that the risks will be engineered out, with little to no constructive explanation as how mitigation would be achieved. Having considered the recent submissions by the applicant, our concerns remain unanswered. Scottish Water has advised the nearest point of mains water supply to where we reside is about a mile. But even with pipework being laid, the pressure is insufficient to supply water beyond that point, so mains water supply is not an option, regardless of cost. So we ask again, what would the applicant do if our private water supply is lost, or the supply is rendered unreliable, or if the water is contaminated? I briefly want to mention flicker effect, as our home would be directly impacted. When we asked at one of the public exhibitions at Torfins Town Hall, we were advised that the sunlight would be monitored continuously and any turbines causing flicker would be switched off. Seriously, who is going to monitor the sunlight and direction of the sunlight in relation to residences that are to the north of the proposed development? This dismissive response and lack of respect demonstrates the attitude of the applicant towards the community. We do not believe the allegedly altruistic motives for the proposal. We do believe the applicant does not care about the direct impact on the community and that all they care about is profit. This is not NIMBYism. We are supportive of environmentally sound and sustainable green energies and recently installed solar panels on our home. We noted very recently that the Berwick Bank project, to be positioned 23 miles off the east coast in the North Sea, could generate enough electricity to meet the annual energy needs of every household in Scotland twice over. Why then is this proposal required? This is a wrong plan in the wrong place. Please reject this application before it is, in the saddest words of the English language, too late. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we're going to hear from Angela Funk.
My name is Angela Funk. I'm a civil engineer and specialize in underground engineering with many years of experience in civil infrastructure, flood prevention, hydrology, and groundwater management. I also live in the Hill of Fair area, and like many of our neighbors, my partner and I rely entirely on the private water supply, the Greystone Burn, sourced from the Hill of Fair. All required construction activities for the project will disturb the land, the water system, the water quality, and the delicate balance that keeps our springs and wells flowing and the groundwater levels consistent for abstraction. Why private water supplies matter? In a very remote rural area like the Hill of Fair, where mains water is not available and never will be, private water supplies are essential for domestic, agriculture, and commercial use. Nearly 50 homes and businesses depend on private water supplies for drinking, cooking, farming, and everyday life around the Hill of Fair. These supplies are not just important, they are essential. If the water becomes polluted or dries up, our homes could be considered uninhabitable under Scottish law. That is not just a personal inconvenience, it is a legal and public health issue. We are already seeing the effects of climate change in this area, currently classified by SEPA as area with moderate scarcity. Droughts are becoming more frequent and groundwater recharge is becoming less reliable. This makes our water supplies even more fragile. The developer has not considered how climate change may make these problems worse. There is no modeling of how reduced rainfall or higher temperatures will affect water flow or supply in long term. The developers and construction activities will aggravate these vulnerabilities. There is no integrated assessment of how different construction activities interact and by doing so affecting private water supplies and groundwater-dependent terrestrial ecosystems. This fragmented approach undermines the precautionary principles and fails to meet regulatory expectations. What is missing? One of the most concerning issues is that important assessments at groundwater modeling, water quality monitoring strategies, and key mitigation plans for pollution prevention and peat management and detailed drainage design will only be completed after planning permission is granted. This deferral prevents meaningful scrutiny and undermines transparency and limits stakeholder engagement. It means that the public and regulators are being asked to prove the project without seeing the full picture. That we are being asked to trust that everything will be fine without seeing the evidence first. That is not good enough, not when people's home, health, and livelihoods are at stake. The proposed development poses a significant and unquantified risk to our private water supplies and the hydrological integrity of the Hill of Fare. The mitigation measures are vague, generic, and insufficiently tailored to the site's unique environmental conditions. The cumulative impact of quarrying, blasting, excavations, drainage alterations, vegetation loss, and proposed groundwater abstraction has not been adequately assessed. The developer's reliance on post-consent documentation and generic safeguards is unacceptable for a project of this scale and sensitivity. We are not opposed to renewable energy, but it must be done responsibly. It must protect the people who live here and the water we depend on. My partner and I respectfully ask the decision makers to reject the application. We have no confidence anymore that the developer understands the importance of the protection and safeguarding of water quality and quantity for our private water supplies throughout the construction, operation, and decommissioning of the wind farm. The protection of our private water supplies is not optional. It is a legal, environmental, and moral obligation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Colette Blackwell for Bert McIntosh.
Thank you, ma'am. In this case, I'm speaking on behalf of Bert McIntosh, who is the Managing Director of McIntosh Plant Hire Limited. These are his words. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I have been a resident of this area for over 80 years, during which I have cycled, walked, and enjoyed the freedom of this beautiful natural hill. The McIntosh family business was established 75 years ago and has been contributing to the local economy ever since. I'd like to raise serious concerns about the potential impact of the proposed Hill of Fare wind farm on the Meikle Tap radio mast, an issue that directly affects the operations of McIntosh Plant Hire and could have broader implications on communications. The Meikle Tap radio mast is located just east of the proposed wind farm site and provides essential radio coverage, especially for mobile units operating near ground level. It plays a critical role in ensuring safe and reliable communications for McIntosh Plant Hire, particularly in areas west of the mast. Recognising the seriousness of the situation, the developer commissioned a report by Kinetic to assess the potential impacts. That report was completed in August 2024. Unfortunately, its findings are far from reassuring. Kinetic used propagation data to model current coverage. The concern is that the proposed turbines, due to both shadowing and signal reflection, will seriously affect transmissions. Let me explain briefly what these effects mean. First, there's signal shadowing, where turbines block radio signals, creating dead zones directly behind them. The report assessed only the contribution from the turbine towers, excluding the impact of the moving blades, which are known to add variable and often significant interference. Kinetic judged a 3 dB loss as significant, but provided no justification for why this threshold is appropriate in this context. Without quantifying the impact of the rotating blades, we cannot reasonably assess the full extent of signal loss. Second, there's signal reflection, where the turbines act like mirrors, bouncing signals unpredictably. This can cause those signals to interfere with one another, degrading overall quality. Again, Kinetic's report gives no rationale for why a 20 dB protection ratio is acceptable. These assessments, while technically sound in parts, are ultimately inconclusive and leave too much uncertainty around a critical issue. An indicative radio coverage map was produced to highlight the areas likely to be affected by shadowing and interference. But as the report itself admits, this map is illustrative only and not a reliable predictor of real-world performance. What's especially troubling is that none of the mitigation options presented offer a real solution for the loss of coverage. Reducing turbine size or changing layout may help marginally, but these changes would not remove the interference. Even removing specific turbines would only improve shadowing, not the interference. Modifying the mast itself also offers little hope, as it's already situated on the highest local ground, and increasing antenna height would have minimal effect. The MPH company can have up to 80 radio units, and at short notice, daily notice on customer demands, will include the west area where intense forestry and hill access routes are used 24/7, where emergencies can occur and where phones don't work. This leaves Macintosh Plantire with no realistic mitigation and a high risk of degraded communications. In a safety-critical industry, that's simply not acceptable. To conclude, placing a large-scale wind farm in the vicinity of Meikle Tap Mast presents a material risk to MPH business communications and operations. The developer's assessments to date are qualitative, incomplete, and ultimately inconclusive. Without any proven way to protect or maintain coverage, they do not give us confidence that the mast's performance can be maintained if the wind farm goes ahead. We ask the inquiry to give due weight to this issue and consider it a material risk to communications and operations, not overlooking future employment. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you, all three of you. The next group of speakers is going to be Claire Cameron, Claire Watt, Colette Blackwell on your own behalf, and Duncan Trinder. I'll just give you a minute to swap over. Okay, thanks very much. We're going to start with Claire Cameron in this group.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Claire Cameron and I'm a local primary school teacher. My home has a direct view of the Hill of Fare. I have a passion for the outdoors and enjoy wildlife observing and photography. I agree with every point that has been raised in opposition to the wind farm, but I want to give our wildlife a voice. In Scotland, it is illegal to damage or destroy a red squirrel stray, pine marten's den, bat's roost, and any wild bird's nest. It is also illegal to build 30 metres from a badger set or 100 metres for pile driving or blasting work, which will be a given for building a wind farm. All of these species are present on the Hill of Fare, and going by the size of the proposed wind farm, some or all of these species will definitely illegally be disturbed, injured, or killed. North East Scotland Biological Records Centre provided me with a list of 51 protected species recorded on the Hill of Fare, including 3 species of bat and wildcat, which are protected by not only Scottish and UK law, but also by European. They brought to my attention records of black grouse being present on the hill and said they're highly likely to still be in the area. Black grouse have a red conservation status and are fully protected under law. I have taken many photos from my home of red kites flying over the Hill of Fare. I was upset to find images online of deceased red kites at a wind farm in Luxembourg that I shared with the reporter, but was told they were too distressing to show tonight. This wind farm only has 7 turbines and had to be shut down for investigation due to the loss of so many red kites. I read RES's ornithology report that predicted there will definitely be red kite collisions. How can this be allowed after being reintroduced so successfully in recent years? And if the images of the brutal reality of what will happen to these birds are too upsetting to show, why allow it to happen in the place where locals and tourists will come across the upsetting scenes in person? RES's report predicted one collusion every 630 years for our hen harriers, which is a ridiculous statement, and there is no mention of owls in the report. My friend in Serbia works for a bird protection organisation and has been involved with wind farm installation projects. If they found raptor nests or protected species migrating in a sector, it had to be removed. The same was done for bats. I find it hard to believe that with the extent of the proposed wind farm, that not one turbine has to be removed. I found and shared with the reporter disturbing online footage from Greece showing a vulture colliding into a rotating blade, causing its death. Again, I was told this was too distressing to show tonight. The reality is, if the wind farm goes ahead, tragic incidents like this will happen. Raptors all need natural territories to fly in and hunt successfully. Migrating species, including geese, owls, and osprey, could have their flight paths disturbed and collide into enormous blades. Scottish law states that it's an offence to intentionally or recklessly kill, injure, or take a bird. Surely the government cannot break their own law by supporting the wind farm, allowing reckless killing and injuring of birds. Destroying the Hill of Fare goes against the government's support of green spaces for mental and physical health. The hill is a popular walk and cycling route. People want to enjoy the countryside and not be amongst unsightly, noisy wind turbines. Mature trees that cannot be replaced will be lost forever. Onshore wind farms cannot be reversed and the ecology cannot be recovered. Scotland calls itself a democratic country. Well, if the government ignores the overwhelming majority of oppositions to the Hill of Fare wind farm, this country is nothing but a dictatorship. And how can the government possibly give permission for the wind farm to go ahead when this would mean breaking their own wildlife protection laws? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Claire Watt, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Claire Watt. Hello, Mum. I appreciate the opportunity to speak at this community hearing. Now for something different. This is on behalf of myself, an engineer, and my husband, Keith Watt, who works on some nationally important renewable energy projects, of which we are both supportive, if justified. And we've lived in this era for 20 years. Mum, I'm speaking today. Keith will save his breath to cool his porridge. He's in your energy policy meeting tomorrow. The benefits of further building, or what's called overbuilding, of wind farms in the UK have been overestimated. Wind power has done very well so far in the UK, but we are now at a tipping point where curtailment will increase significantly, where each new wind farm that goes up reduces the efficiency of the entire fleet. This is not controversial. It's supported by multiple credible data, but it's not as widely known as it should be. It is true even for zero grid transmission constraints. We think controversial planning decisions like the Hill of Fare should be robust across a range of possible energy futures, not just the most optimistic one and currently the most unlikely. Wind energy requires fully sized backup systems until adequate storage materializes, and if and when this happens, then we likely already have enough wind. Battery storage has short-term minor usage, but is of negligible, scalable use to tackle this problem. With the most expensive industrial electricity price in the developed world, It is now obvious that UK net zero policies, admirable though they are, increase electricity prices. So this uncertain future requires careful weighing of realistic benefits versus adverse consequences. How to do that? Well, in other words, strategic planning, comparing best places for the UK as a whole to maximise benefit and minimise costs, and also to minimise regrets in case the UK wind project stalls. The July 2025 UK Government Task Force for Onshore Wind promises a strategy for best places. And now that England's moratorium, 10-year moratorium on wind development is over, these best places may be in England closer to demand. Even if it could be demonstrated that this wind farm is a best place, residents are left to live with the adverse impacts, and these need to be properly and generously compensated so the homes affected remain desirable places to live. But there are negligible financial benefits for those enduring 24/7 impact. Also, if granted, this wind farm was granted, our landscape would thereafter be defined as wind-dominated, and that makes it easier for developers to expand more higher turbines, which would be even more invasive. We personally have other concerns: significant build disruption because we work from home, access routes to the hospital, guaranteed security of our water supply, the loss of dark skies, ecological impact on the hill. We have lived for over a decade close to 4 smaller, much smaller turbines surrounding us, which all cause noise nuisance. We hear the nearest ones in our bedroom at night through closed windows. Will we be surrounded by adverse cumulative wind effects in all directions? An ongoing application that's still pending for the nearest turbines to us would double our noise and visual impact. The stress this wind farm application has imposed on us has been great. The Hill of Fare is actually a backdrop of peaceful wilderness and solace for many who are going through hard times like I am at the moment. It's visible far and wide. The adverse consequences are acknowledged. We know what this will look like. We commissioned our own photomontage. So we respectfully ask, don't take this away from us without convincing justification, and if then, robust and fair conditions. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. And Colette Backwell.
Thank you, ma'am. In this case, I'm speaking on behalf of myself. My name is Colette Backwell, and I'm one of the founding members of Hofwig. Almost 3 years ago, we invited the RES project manager to our home to see at first hand the impact of the development, not only on us, but the wider community of Midmar. He wanted to know why we had formed Hofwig and couldn't understand our reasons for objecting to the development, or at least wouldn't admit that he could. He finished by saying, "What is wrong with you people?" That is the only time in 3 years that anyone has referred to us as people. We are not receptors, we are people. We do not live in buildings, we live in homes. Birds, bats, flora, fauna, landscape and archaeology all have statutory bodies representing their interests in this process. But who speaks for the people? At the heart of this issue is not just the development itself, but the way decisions like this are made. What we are witnessing here is a clear contradiction between the Scottish Government's stated commitment to local democracy and the centralised process by which this application is being handled. The Scottish Government, led by the SNP, has long championed community empowerment. They talk about devolving power beyond Holyrood, about giving people more control over the decisions that affect their lives. They have passed the Community Empowerment Act, launched the Democracy Matters consultation, and spoken often about strengthening local governance. But in practice, That commitment does not extend to large wind farm developments like this one. They are decided by Scottish ministers in Edinburgh through processes such as this one. That means that even though Aberdeenshire Council and 6 local community councils have objected, those views are not decisive. They are treated as consultees, not decision makers. This undermines the core principle of local democracy. Our collective objections are not casual objections. They reflect deep, informed and consistent concern about the visual impact, the environmental risks, damage to nature and biodiversity, and the long-term consequences for the Hill of Fare, a landscape that means so much to the people who live here. Scotland already has enough renewable energy consented or in planning to meet Scottish Government targets. By the developer's own admission, this wind farm will have no significant economic benefits at local or national level, and yet they persist with an application that is profit-driven, unnecessary, and in the wrong place. When every level of local democratic representation, from our council to our community councils, and over 75% of local people uniting in opposition, yet the decision can still be taken out of our hands, we have to ask, what does local democracy in Scotland actually mean? Let me be clear, we support renewable energy. We know Scotland must transition to net zero, but that transition must be done with communities, not forced upon them. If the public is to support this transition, then the process must be fair, transparent, and accountable to the people it affects. We're often told that the developers will offer community benefit payments, but that's not the same as community consent. It's compensation, not inclusion. This inquiry is about more than just the Hill of Fare. It is a test of what kind of democracy we live in. If the councils, community councils, and the people, those closest to the land, can all object and still be overruled, then it sends a clear message. Local democracy only counts when it agrees with national policy. That's not right, and it's not what the Scottish Government says it stands for. If we want communities to support the energy transition, then the Government must start by listening to them and respecting their right to shape the future of their local area. That includes us and the Hill of Fare. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Trinder, please.
Thank you, ma'am, and good evening, everyone. My name's Duncan Trinder, and I've lived with my family at Craigshannock Cottage on the Hill of Fare for nearly 28 years. One of 4 properties half a mile up the hill beyond Midmar Castle. At around 1,550 metres, it's the nearest house with a direct window view from the house to the proposed turbines. It's also the property most affected by noise at over 43 decibels at night, and the second highest predicted for shadow flicker at 72 hours a year, as detailed in the environmental impact assessment. In the initial residential visual amenity assessment, the viewpoints chosen for the 4 Craigshannock properties and Midmar Castle also, and many other properties, they appear to have been specifically chosen to be behind trees and shrubs, with the consequential impact dismissed due to the heavy screening, whether this was done deliberately or not on the part of RES. This degree of disingenuity was commented on my initial objection and representation. Following a request from Hoffwig for properties that should be visited by the reporter, I requested they visit Craigshannock properties, them being the closest to the turbines, and I sent an image of the view from our sitting room window, which you can see on the screen as it comes up. Resultant conclusion in the updated Residential Visual Amenity Assessment, RVAA, was a major to moderate magnitude of change and a significant level of effect for the property, and high magnitude of change and major and significant level of effect from Craigshannock Farm, just a stone throws away. Despite these highest rankings, it concludes, and I quote, that the proposed development would not be overbearing due to the separation distance between the property and the proposed development. Remember, this is 1,500 metres in the wireline, and would therefore be judged that there would be no potential for the proposed development to be considered overbearing or the residential visual assessment threshold to be reached. In all cases, these visual assessments take no account of the immediate locality in which we live and we spend our everyday lives in. We literally walked and driven up and down the track to our house thousands of times. Cumulatively, we spend hours a day on this access in the surrounding fields and forests, and it's much a part of where we live as the actual house itself. And as you can see from the images, we have a near field view of the turbines on a daily basis at much closer proximity, so the level of effect will be much higher still. I strongly disagree with this dismissive conclusion and believe that the immediate surrounding locality should be part of this residential assessment as for any street you would live in. So I did want to ask the public audience tonight to be the judge on this expert opinion and ask in their view, based on the images and the wirelines on the screen, and in the words of the RVA guidelines, to ascertain if the visual impact of the development would result in the property becoming an unattractive place to live when judged objectively in the public interest. However, as the public audience is not allowed to participate and not permitted to put it to the vote, so I'll leave it to everyone's own judgment whether they think it would become an unattractive place to live. In a sense, this question has already been tested by virtue of us trying to sell our house for the last year. The proposed wind farm was referenced in the home report, and there was direct evidence this had a significant effect on the number of viewers to the property. We estimate at least 50% declining or cancelling viewings when learning of the wind farm application in the home report. I should also note that in the opinion of Hofweg's landscape consultant, that's Kelda Platt of Monroe Landscapes, she too disagrees with Mr. Ferber's conclusion and believes that these properties exceed the residential visual amenity threshold, and that this consent for this development should be refused. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of the people who have just spoken. I'm going to take a short break so people can get a bit of air or a drink of water if they need to, and we'll start again at 8 o'clock. That's just over a quarter of an hour. Thank you.
Diagrams in it, so I'm going to paraphrase here, but you've got the complete statement.
Right, can I just say a couple of things before you
start?
Sure,
sorry, I was
That's all right, it's all right.
Oh, shut up.
Just a couple of things I learned during the break that I was going to share with people. One is just that the lady taking photographs is from the Press and Journal, and I've said it's fine to take photographs, but if any speaker particularly doesn't want to be in a close-up photograph, if you let her know. And the other is, I think some people towards the back were having a bit of trouble hearing, so if the speakers from now on could maybe try and speak a little bit closer to your microphones, that should help with that. Okay, sorry for interrupting you.
Thank you. Is this my best side? Yeah. Anyway, I was saying I've lived about 3 kilometres north of the Hill of Fare in Midmar since 1983. My cottage looks directly south onto the Hill of Fare and probably has the least restricted view of the whole hill from the north, and is a haven of tranquility and peace. I'm a Cambridge University physics graduate, so I'm familiar with many points that I've referred to in my report. In my view, the proposed development can best be described as environmental vandalism, masquerading as green energy. But it is simply commercial greed exploiting a flawed economic model to make profit for those who do not live here. And with that, I'll go into a little bit more detail. I'm completely against the proposed wind farm, which in my opinion is completely unsuited to this quite densely populated rural area. I can already see 7 smaller wind turbines from my garden, which have a checkered history of failure, noise, lack of maintenance, and have never, to the best of my knowledge, never all operated, even in ideal wind conditions. As others have mentioned, another wind farm is actually not needed to supply electricity to this area of Scotland, where we already have a surfeit of wind farms supplying far more wind-derived electricity than even the most ambitious predictions of future use, with electric vehicles, heat pumps, etc., etc. Battery storage, also probably dangerous to the environment, will be hopelessly inadequate during Dunkelflaut periods in winter, and at best provides a few hours of storage capacity at present. The turbines are far too large and in the wrong place, mostly on the crest of the Hill of Fare. It will also necessitate huge pylons and associated equipment to export the power to where it is presumably needed. This doesn't appear to be mentioned in the RES application. It will also require extensive blasting and damage to the environment with unpredictable effects on private water supplies which I use, as well as damaging the ecosystem forever. I depend upon a private water supply for my property. It will create noise and light pollution from this rural area, which is almost a dark sky area. It will also harm local wildlife, such as red kites, which are quite common in Midmar. In fact, I was watching one wheel over the Hill of Fare just before I came out tonight. It appears that the wind farm will substantially economically benefit the landowner, who apparently lives in England, and the developer, who admitted at our local hall presentations that they would transfer ownership to a third party abroad and have no interest in maintaining the equipment or removing it at the end of its life. The existing turbines in the area are poorly maintained, and I have no confidence that this development will be any different. The wind farm appears to be simply a cash cow to be exploited for those with little interest in our environment and quality of life. We are custodians of the local area, and current and future generations will not thank us for destroying this beautiful area, which has been occupied since prehistoric times. And then, as I come onto the graphs and things, the questions really are, why build it here? If it's needed, although it's windy on the top of the Hill of Fare, there are many more suitable sites, and I've put some diagrams from the Met Office with mean wind speed, illustrating quite clearly that the Central Belt and other areas, which already actually have an enormous number of wind turbines. I drove through Lanarkshire the other day, and the noise, I stopped in a lay-by, I was quite struck by how noisy actually fairly small turbines there were. So the point is really that if you're going to build more wind farms, which in my view aren't needed, build them closer to where it's needed. As Hofwig have calculated, the wind farm will never be carbon neutral despite all the assurances, so surely this negates the point of the development. And then the pictures that you actually can't really see very well, which rather illustrates my point, to be honest, is there are some fairly small turbines. I mentioned I can already see 7, and if you're really close, you could just about see 2 of the blades going by there. But from in the hall, you won't be able to see this. And I've got several graphs and spectrographs and things. The point is, even with small wind turbines, you get the thump-thump of the blades, which when it's windy, you can't hear because the wind blows the noise away. But in the still evenings, when there's some wind, it's surprisingly they're still going round. You not only get the whoosh, whoosh or thump-thump noise, but strangely, I've noticed this over the last few years, you have a very low frequency node and antinode. You're barely aware of it. I can hear it at my front door. You go 4 meters to the right or the left, you can't hear it, and they're nodes and antinodes of constructive and destructive interference. So with that, with all the graphs, there's no point in talking about that. Just to mention with the birds, there's a deciduous woodland that was planted 20 years ago across the valley towards the Hill of Fare, and it's populated massively by owls. Every night you can hear tawny owls, and I've both seen barn and tawny owls and the red kites and all the other birds. So there's a significant ornithological population in our area. So to conclude, the proposed industrial development will destroy the peace and quiet of this precious area and likely cause damage to water supplies, as well as other environmental concerns that I have. Surely it's better to cite such developments, if indeed they are needed, closer to where they may be needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And George Rogerson, please.
Good evening, ma'am. My name is George Rogerson. I'm a hill walker and an outdoor enthusiast. I moved to Bankery some 47 years ago, and throughout my time living here, I've been actively involved in the community. My children and grandchildren have attended the local schools. I have developed a very deep affinity for Bankery, Deeside, and the larger area of this part of Aberdeenshire. A lot of my leisure time has been spent walking and cycling the hills of Deeside and Donside. The Hill Affair has always been central to that experience. As a member of the Walking Worthies group, I helped plan weekly walks across the region. Over the years, I've gained a deep knowledge of these hills and their views. The Hill Affair is one we return to again and again, whether walking up from Bankery or traversing across from Torfens to the Eck Road and vice versa. We know it well, you know. From its southern edge, the views stretched from the North Sea to Loch Nagar. These are exceptional, uplifting vistas that would be ruined by turbines dominating the skyline. Hill Affair is not a remote site. It's a distinctive landmark seen daily by thousands, whether from the Dee Valley, from Bankery, or even when commuting home from Aberdeen. To place industrial-scale turbines along its ridgeline would permanently damage that visual and recreational character of this much-loved hill. There's also concerns about access, construction traffic, infrastructure, and later the constant noise and motion of the turbine blades, which will change the atmosphere of a peaceful, welcoming place into one that feels hostile. For many of us, the Hill Affair is a place to escape, exercise, and connection with nature. That sense will be lost. Now I speak too as an engineer with more than 40 years' experience in the energy sector. My career spans electrical distribution, transmission lines and substations, electrical power generation, nuclear and oil sectors. I understand the imperative to transition away to cleaner energy sources and the significant role that onshore and offshore wind will play in this transition. This project, at just 0.1 of a gigawatt, is insignificant in terms of its contribution to the UK grid. By contrast, the North East already has more than 20 gigawatt of offshore wind in planning or construction, 200 times larger than the output from this project. These projects will truly make a difference, while also bringing jobs and investment to the region. The harm to the visual and recreational value of this iconic landscape is not justified by the limited and distant benefits the project may provide. We must focus on projects of the right scale, developed with local support. Small intrusive schemes like this risk alienating communities and undermining confidence in the larger, more beneficial projects offshore. In conclusion, the Hill Affair is more than just a hill, it's a landmark, a place of recreation, part of the identity of Deeside. The limited benefit of this wind farm cannot justify the permanent damage it would cause. I respectfully urge the inquiry to reject this development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, and Jenny McDermott, please.
Hello, I'm Jenny McDermott and I live approximately 2 kilometres west of the proposed wind farm site and share the concerns partly we've heard this evening and many other of the community regarding the potential impact of the development on private water supplies. It's well documented that private water supplies in this region are particularly vulnerable during prolonged periods of dry, and this is going to become a greater issue with climate change. The Scottish Government will be aware of this research because they fund it, and particularly in the northeast, in this area, there's a lot of research looking because of the vulnerability of water supplies here and the effect it's going to have on households, but also livelihoods, local farmers who won't be able to, if the water's contaminated, there won't be water for their livestock, etc. And interestingly, I'm bemused at how they came up with a 2-kilometre radius for houses that would be vulnerable. My house sits within 2 kilometres, but my water supply is 200 metres outside the area. So while my house is seen as vulnerable, my water supply won't be won't be included in any of the sort of problem, if there are problems with it. And I've asked for a clear scientific justification for this 2-kilometre boundary, but have not received any answers to this. So concerns about how far away we are and what will be done. But also in the application, Res described the risk to private water supplies as high. So there's a high risk that there could be contamination or damage to the water supply. But I can't find anywhere that says what they will do. They have stated that there will be guidelines that will be put in place, and they will follow these in terms of when they're developing. But if there's damage, there is nothing to say what will be done. As with someone else who spoke, I asked this question at one of the public consultations, and I received the same answer. They would provide bottled water, which again is an environmental disaster. But also, how do you shower, clean clothes, etc., with bottled water? So it's not a sensible solution, either in the short or the long term. And I'm just concerned nobody's taking responsibility for this. I contacted ministers in the Scottish Government and asked them what would happen if households ran out or didn't have drinkable water, or supplies were damaged on the back of an application that they'd approved. And they said it was not anything to do with them. But this is despite the human rights statement they have about access to clean, safe water for everybody in Scotland. So my concern is what will happen if there is damage caused to water supplies. I've yet to hear what will happen, and I think if this is taken forward to the Scottish Government, they need to provide some written guarantee to people in the area on private water supplies about who will be responsible to providing the houses again with a safe water supply and sufficient water, and who will pay for it. And I think we need some sort of guarantee of that because of how it will affect households and also local businesses. And finally, the point that I wanted to make was about what seems to be a lack of joined-up approach across the government, which isn't unfamiliar, because on one side, in the last 2 years, the Scottish Government, through Nature Scot, has provided 2 grants to the next estate to restore peatland on the Hill of Fare. And now, obviously, that is potentially going to, if the application goes ahead, that will obviously be torn up. So I think this just to summarise, concern about the water, what was the justification for it, and is the government in this application going to take up a joined up position in terms of all the things that will happen? We know from numerous examples that there have been so many unintended consequences when there's just been a single lens looking at a solution to something. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Jonathan Rose, please.
Thank you very much. My name's Jonathan Rose, and I'm concerned about traffic flow through Echt using the B977. This is another voice of the rural residents speaking up against a large, what appears to be a conglomerate who is in league with the development process. The Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment provides guidelines for environmental assessment of traffic and movement for projects. It refers to traffic flow thresholds and severance. Traffic flow thresholds are expressed as a starting point for any assessment and typically have been derived from studies of major changes in traffic flow and should therefore be used cautiously in any assessment. And severance is a measure of the impact on communities and their geography, population and needs. Severance may result from the difficulty of crossing a heavily trafficked road or a physical barrier created by infrastructure. It states further, assessment of severance should pay full regard to specific local conditions. The applicant's assessment of HGV traffic through Echt on the B977 says it will cause a 63 to 78% increase based on data from the A944, which is the Aberdeen to Ufford road, which counts up to 80 HGVs per day. In fact, there may be 5 or 10 HGVs per day at the very outside on the B977 through Echt. And they would mainly be associated with 2 local HGV contractors or agricultural machinery using the road for the small number of fields to the south of the village. There are no quarries or other needs for regular HGV traffic along the B977. Sowing and harvest time may have raised traffic volumes, but nothing like the base average suggested for the A944. The 135 HGV vehicles per day for the project assessed by the applicant represents a 650 to 1,300% increase. The particular severance risks for Echt are the noise created, access to the school at the start and end of the day, and emergency services using Echt as a major connecting route to Aberdeen and West Hill. The pedestrian numbers are assessed in Echt as low, which is correct for a village of 700 or so souls, with a shop, post office, restaurant and school. Each journey, however modest, has equal value to those making it, and any perceived threat or obstruction from HGV construction traffic should be acceptable to the person making the journey. The restaurant and shop post office could be at risk of closing if access is restricted to outside construction hours of 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. 6 days a week. For the major loads of the turbines and ancillary equipment, of which there are expected to be 177, to negotiate the B977 through and to the south of Echt, they encounter a B-listed wall and gate piers with tall ball finials associated with Echt Manse, 9 mature hardwood trees and a small stone bridge. In conclusion, any traffic flow assessment needs to follow the IEMA guidelines, that it is properly conducted by a competent expert. The villages of Echt must be surveyed using a suitably objective method, and the cultural heritage of the Grade B listed wall and the amenity value of the trees assessed by Aberdeenshire Council. I therefore recommend that this project, if this project is to go ahead, the route through Echt is not used for any construction traffic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Leslie Ellis, please.
Less than 10 years ago, I also objected to a wind farm, so I understand how everyone feels. What changed for me? I was invited to help our local schools with their science agenda. Now I work a lot with children. So I got to grips with the climate science, and what I saw appalls me. It's the sheer scale of the ongoing carbon dioxide pollution due to the burning of fossil fuels. 37 billion tonnes of excess CO2 every year versus less than 500 million tonnes for natural volcanic processes. And every single molecule of CO2 adds to the problem. The best briefed man on the planet, the Secretary General of the UN, got it spot on when he said, "Humanity has opened the gates of hell." It truly is an existential issue, and every serious climate scientist will tell you that we need to get on top of it in this key decade. Emissions have surged over the last 40 years, even knowing we had a problem. Now the word unprecedented is used almost daily as yet another weather-related disaster is reported. Landslips, wildfires, drought, extreme heat, massive flooding, crops lost, homes lost, lives lost. The Hill of Fare will not remain the same if we don't put this wind farm there. Climate change is its worst enemy. Ask Glen Rosa what happened to its wildlife this year, or St Kilda to its archaeology. We only have solar, wind and batteries supported by the grid that we can deploy quickly and at scale. We are one of the windiest places in Europe and a sensible place for wind turbines. They can't all go offshore because China and Russia have shown us how vulnerable their cables are. There are no other alternatives that can be deployed at scale now, halfway through this critical decade. Not big nuclear, not small nuclear, not fusion, not carbon capture, nor tidal. There is no reason, though, why wind turbines can't be seen as temporary and taken down when we are on top of the issue. After all, what is the other alternative? Just to delay some more? Dig ourselves into an even deeper hole? We Brits introduced the Industrial Revolution and spread it across the world via our empire. We opened Pandora's box, and we have a moral duty to do everything we can to help us out of this situation. We must make progress, and every molecule of CO2 that is not emitted by fossil fuels helps. It is a myth that our actions make no difference. The number one objection being made here is the effect on the view. We have failed future generations.
Can people please let the speaker finish? Thank you.
We have failed future generations, every single one of us who are here, if we have to look at some turbines. That's a small price to pay for the fact that we have allowed this pollution to get so dangerously out of control on our watch. Madam Reporter, I ask you to think about the very young and those still to be born. Their voices are not here, yet their lives will be blighted by the decisions made by inquiries now. What is more important, their future or our view? So I ask you to allow this development.
Thank you, Mrs. Ellis, and thank you to everybody in this group of speakers. We're going to hear next from Elizabeth Ellen Murray, Louis Backwell, Margot White, Mary Bramwell, and Sir Moya Lockhead. Okay, we're going to hear from Elizabeth Ellen Murray, please.
Evening, everyone. It's good to be here, so my voice can be heard. My name is Elizabeth Ellen Murray. My family and I live in Midmar. My husband was offered a job opportunity based in Aberdeen, so we chose to live in Midmar, although we could have chosen anywhere in Aberdeenshire. We selected an elevated south-facing plot facing the Hill of Fare in 1982, 43 years ago. Midmar is a beautiful, idyllic to raise children, fresh air, open countryside, little traffic, safe and healthy for children to learn and grow. My family and I have grown to love the peace and tranquility
marking the season's changes, appreciating the natural cycle of life. Over the years, we have seen an increase in wildlife in the area: roe deer, badgers, red squirrels, otters, hedgehogs, red kites, buzzards, and the occasional osprey, geese, many species of smaller birds. People living on the north of the hill will be most adversely affected by the construction and operation of the wind farm. It causes me concern in 4 main areas. All of my daytime windows face south to the Hill of Fare. RES tell me that we will see all or part of the 16 turbines. The view that has become precious to us will be forever ruined. During the winter months, the sun follows the outline of the hill. The turbine blades will cast moving shadows across the landscape. To suggest the turbines will be turned off if the flickering shadow effect causes problems is a nonsense. At my home, there are times when it is so quiet that I can hear my own heartbeat. The human voice carries for many hundreds of meters. Noise from the turbines would greatly increase the ambient noise. Construction and operation of the wind farm pose a serious threat to our private water supplies, on which we are completely dependent. Scottish Water have told me they cannot supply mains water to my home or any of the other outlying homes, businesses and farms. The water pressure at the termination point, Sunhoney and Tillyburlock, is too low to pump water further. Scottish Water have no plans to ever extend mains water to Midmar outlying areas. The cost would be prohibitive, with too few recipients to justify the cost. The likelihood of this poorly planned, badly sited, major civil engineering construction project polluting, damaging or destroying some, if not all, private water supplies is high. We cannot live in our homes without water. The farms with sheep and cattle could not exist, nor could the businesses. We are all dependent on water from the Hill of Fare. The construction of this unneeded, unwanted industrial monstrosity could destroy the present-day life in Midmar forever. I respectfully request you to recommend rejection of the application for the Hill of Fare. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll hear next from Louis Backwell. Could you just turn your microphone off? Thank you.
Good evening, ma'am. My name is Louis Backwell, and also a founding member of Hofwig. And while in principle I support Scotland's transition to renewable energy, I strongly believe this application is unsuitable and should not be approved. I have a background as an accredited Eco-Audit and Management System, EMAS, auditor. EMAS held companies to high environmental standards, in many ways even stricter than ISO 14001. RES, the applicant, doesn't appear to hold either certification, and frankly, I'm not surprised after reviewing their documentation. The chair of their board, Gavin McAlpine, states that responsible business practices are key to RES. I do not see much evidence of this, so let me explain some of the main concerns. Firstly, a lack of alternatives and poor scoping. There is no evidence that RES seriously considered any alternative sites, nor any alternative energy sources. For instance, geothermal energy, a strong potential use for the hill, is not even mentioned, despite being a 24/7 clean energy source, unlike wind. This shows a lack of strategic thinking in site selection and energy planning. Secondly, environmental and safety risks. The carbon savings claimed by RES are misleading. Their calculation is flawed in that it uses the wrong emission factor and leaves out key carbon costs like the export route and even the aviation impacts. As outlined in the Hofwig submission, this project could even increase emissions over its full life cycle. Radiation risk is also not properly assessed. The site lies in a naturally radioactive area, yet RES only engaged a radiological protection advisor, eventually, not an expert in geophysical impacts of blasting on groundwater, meaning that there is no adequate risk analysis regarding the potential contamination of surface and groundwater, e.g. the River Dee catchment, or public health risks to residents and wildlife. They also failed to assess risks from eroding turbine blades, including the potential contamination of groundwater with bisphenol A, a known endocrine disruptor. Critically, there is no risk assessment at all for the battery storage system, nor any reference to a safety plan for its operation. There's also no assessment for radar interference and flight safety risks into Aberdeen Air and Heliport, both key transport hubs. This omission includes no human factors analysis of additional stress placed on air traffic controllers. On the issues of noise that we've heard constantly, RES has not assessed if there are any nearby residents with specific sensitivities to noise. In addition, if ETSU R97 is an acceptable standard, why then have there been so many noise complaints since its inception? Why is this being ignored in the current review of the guidance? If noise causes annoyance, it's a nuisance, and planning conditions shouldn't license a nuisance. They can't override nuisance law. Thirdly, procedural failures. On the radiation issue, Hofwig reached out to SEPA, UK Health Security Agency, and the Council, but none would give an opinion and referred us to one of the others. That's a clear failure of procedural fairness and public engagement and transparency. According to planning regulations, Scottish Government guidance and human rights law, there's an expectation of fairness, accountability and proper consultation. In this case, that standard has not been met. At a minimum, this should lead to postponing any decision, and the public deserves to know who the reporter is taking advice from on these serious matters. I ask the Scottish ministers to uphold their duty of care to all citizens and refuse consent for the Hill of Fair wind farm. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Backwell, and we will hear from Margot White.
Good evening. I'm Margot White, and I live at Tilly Burlock, just to the north of the Hill of Fair. I want to say, stop industrialising our beautiful countryside. The Hill of Fair is a prominent landscape feature and a key landmark. The wind turbines proposed are around the height of the hill itself, which is approximately 250 metres above the surrounding landscape, and will dominate the landscape for many miles north, south, east and west, as far away as Moray and Banff. They will also dominate the landscape of the Dee Valley and open the floodgates for other wind developments within the Dee catchment, conflicting with local policies to promote tourism and biodiversity within the Dee Valley. I am angry that Scotland's natural beauty and the amenities of its residents living in the countryside is being blighted by these developments, as the Scottish Government already has enough wind farms underway or in planning to meet its net zero targets for wind. State of Nature 2023, a collaboration between 64 conservation and research organisations, states the UK is now one of the most nature-depleted countries on Earth. The Scottish Government Onshore Wind Policy Statement 2022 states the overarching aim is to enable the protection and restoration of local biodiversity, ensuring that wind energy can be deployed in harmony with, rather than in detriment to, the essential protection and regeneration of our natural environment. Why destroy the planet to save it? It's not just a case of locating these 16 enormous turbines on the hill plateau, which will require massive foundations, but also the associated infrastructure. There will be blasted borrow pits to create the extensive road network, large areas of battery storage, substations, cranes and pylons. This will all require approach roads from Echt. All of this leading to a huge loss of peat on the hill and the natural environment of its varied wildlife. The development will directly impact the many households, farms and businesses which are on or around the Hill of Fare in terms of visual impact, noise pollution, light pollution, disruption to signals, and plastics pollution from shedding of microplastics. The complete Hill of Fare plateau will be destroyed. The development will have a major detrimental impact on the natural environment and local biodiversity, contrary to the strategic aims of the Scottish Government to promote these assets. In general, I am in favour of decarbonising our economy, and wind power is a valuable part of that. But wind farms need to be appropriately sited, be of a suitable scale, and not directly affect communities. I am one of approximately 150 households and farms that have private water supplies and rely on the Hill of Fare for our water. The developer RES has not demonstrated how these private water supplies will be protected from contamination or disruption during blasting. There is a massive likelihood that local water supplies will be affected. It cannot be right to allow a development that will affect our only source of water. This development must not be granted permission. Local democracy must be upheld.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mary Bramwell.
Just get organised here. Okay. Thank you. That's lovely. Okay. Good evening. My name is Mary Bramwell, and I live about 6 miles south of the Hill of Fare. I'm here to ask the question, why has the Hill of Fare been left out of the decision-making process in this proposed wind farm development, and why no legal guardian has been appointed to represent the Hill's needs? As an entity in itself, the Hill needs the protection of rights because its physical being and its dignity will experience threat and violation if this planning application goes ahead. Physically, its moorland vegetation and all that goes with it will be mechanically destroyed and its granite blasted by explosives. It should have the right to refuse this and the anchoring of electro-technical turbine structures onto its being. It is a question, does the Hill inherently require turbines for its well-being? The Hill needs more than mere mitigation from this proposed destruction. It needs complete protection. Protection from the developer, RES, and sadly, protection from its owner, Dinect Estates. The Hill is a living entity, and this logical reality is discussed in detail in Professor Robert McFarlane's newest book, Is a River Alive? The Hill of Fare gives rise to life, and in common with other living entities, it has its own reason to be and to exist, even if we do not fully understand this. As with other living entities whose rights have been eventually recognised, it is now the turn of the last category of living being to acquire legal rights, nature herself. Nature governance and the rights of nature movement is growing in public consciousness and therefore momentum. Witness the extensive media coverage
of the grief and outrage of the tree felling at Sycamore Gap. The Rights of Nature movement advocates granting legal rights to natural ecosystems, recognizing them as living entities with inherent intrinsic value rather than as mere property or resources for human exploitation. The Hill could get protection by being granted legal personhood. This would give it equal status and equal rights, rights which are only currently permitted to companies like RES and Annette Estates. But things are changing, and nature rights are already happening in the UK. Lewes District Council in Sussex is about to make history, becoming the first UK local authority to sign up to the Universal Declaration of Rights of Rivers Charter for the River Ouse. 12 more are in the pipeline, influenced in this aspect by UK barrister Monica Ferrier-Tinta. This is her book cover. A Barrister for the Earth is the title of her book. And here in Scotland, the Scottish Government has stated on record that there is a case to be considered for personhood rights for the River Clyde. Businesses are catching up, and a growing number now have nature as a member of their board, with the company Faith in Nature, which produces body products, as just one example. And the World Business Council for Sustainable Development has stated that every industry has some degree of direct and indirect dependency on nature. Let's imagine if the Hill of Fare had been granted legal personhood. Its status would then have been elevated to that of stakeholder, and therefore assured of its rightful place in the decision-making process. And having legal personhood in common with other living beings, the Hill would not be required to justify its existence on the earth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would just flag up maybe to the applicant that it's Mary Bramwell who also has a written statement on record for the landscape and visual session, even though she's not participating in the discussions on that. Okay, we'll hear from Samoya Lockhead now.
Thanks very much for... too close to the microphone, eh? It's always been my problem, being too close to the microphone. Thanks for allowing me to speak and for taking my paper as read. When we bought the Glassell estate 28 years ago, it was a privilege to meet with the late Dick Balharry, the renowned Scottish conservationist. Dick was honoured by the Royal Scottish Geographical Society for his service to conservation and awarded the Society's Geddes Environmental Medal. A top guy. He became a close friend of mine and a mentor, helping me to implement two key priorities at our Glassell estate. The first was to look after, of course, the land and wildlife, and he called that stewardship of the land. And then, of course, the duty of care to our community. And his legacy is that that's what we've done in 28 years. The estate is now in better shape than it was when we took it on. The wildlife is prospering. My daughter and her family run the estate, and me and my wife, Lady Audrey, who are in the back here, we just enjoy living there. Audrey complains that the red squirrels eat more and it costs more to feed them than it costs to feed us. But that doesn't matter. It's a fantastic place to live. Now, I set that scene because then I look at how the stark contrast between what we've been able to do and the behaviour of the landowner at the Dunnecht estate. That includes, of course, the Hill of Fare, you heard all about tonight. And we're witnessing here a classic case of a very wealthy landowner trying to cash in on the government's policy, a government policy that was never intended to damage the landscape of Scotland. Now, these people are trying to seek permission to install an offshore wind farm on the top of the hill. It beggars belief. I couldn't believe it when I first got the Hofwig brochure and saw, what are they up to? It just demonstrates to me, and I'm sure to this audience, that this landowner has a complete disregard for what my good friend, the late Dick Balharry, would have said about stewardship, looking after the land, looking after the wildlife, and, of course, a duty of care to the well-being of the community. It's not mentioned. These people are coming here to make lots of money, and they're really not interested in what they do to the community. So I say that because, ma'am, your views on making a planning system fair is good. It says that it is a planning system which is fair is one that delivers on what is needed in the long-term public interest. And I welcome that. I welcome you here for this intervention. The long-term public interest of this plan is negative. The upside applies only to the guys on my left, the people the landowner and the developers who are going to make loads of cash. And that's not the reason that this government, and why we're aiming for net zero, that's not the reason. It's not to damage, as I said earlier, the landscape of Scotland. So, ma'am, fair planning, and I agree with that. I think that's a worthwhile position. I think the unintended consequence of the way we fund these onshore may be the issue. Maybe it's creating a position where we've got an astonishing transfer of cash from us guys that pay our electric bills to the landowners, even landlords who can find a bit of land to stick some turbines on. What we've got there is cash from our bills is going to them. There's something wrong with that. And it's produced a situation in the UK where we've got the highest electrical bills in the modern world. I'm told, I don't know whether this is true, I'm told we're 4 times more expensive, our energy, our electric is 4 times more expensive than in the USA. It's ridiculous. But that's the way it is, because that's how we've got. In this rush to get green, and we have to be green, we have to get there, but there's a way of doing it that doesn't put our steel industry out of business, that doesn't create job losses in a massive scale, and the Hill of Fare wind farm's not the way to do it. And finally, ma'am, I think I've learned so much tonight listening to the presentation. You must, after all this time, you must go away thinking, my goodness. But you will have a way, I'm sure, of consolidating that. This detailed inquiry has shown the many reasons why the Hill of Fare is just the wrong location for a wind farm. It is just not to be there. I hope, ma'am, with respect, you will recommend refusal of this reckless, irresponsible planning application, sending a clear message, this is important, a clear message to other landowners, other developers, that this type of behaviour, this has been going on for 3 years, people here are weary of this, that this sort of behaviour won't be tolerated in the future. The Hill of Fare project, I heard it earlier, is environmental vandalism. It's fuelled by the absentee landowners' greed. And I would expect a fair planning system to protect us from that.
Thank you to all the speakers in that group. The next group of speakers is Colette Backwell again for Mona McLean this time, Robin Worsman, Sue and Roy McNaughton and Tim Sibley. And this is the last group of speakers. Thank you. And we'll start with Ms Backwell again when you're ready.
Thank you, ma'am. In this case, I'm speaking on behalf of Morna White McLean, who is one of my neighbours in Tillyburlough Midmar. I do so not just for her, but with her, because I share her views deeply. These are Morna's words. I'm not a natural speaker, but I often struggle to be concise, especially when speaking about something so close to our hearts. But I will do my best to express the emotion, the connection, and the very real concern that the proposed wind farm on the Hill of Fare has stirred in us. This landscape could be blemished to the point of becoming an eyesore. But this place, this land, is not just part of our view. It's part of our lives, our memories, our history. The first night I visited my parents at the Midmar Inn, where they were landlords, I looked up and saw the aurora borealis dancing across a pure black sky. It was magical, a moment I've never forgotten. It's something I wish every generation could experience. But with industrial scale development, where will future generations go to see a dark sky, to hear silence, to feel peace? The McLean family has lived in Midmar since 1959, 3 generations side by side with other long-standing farming families, living on, working with and caring for this land. My husband Jim and I were married at Christ Church. Our wedding photos feature the standing stones and the rolling Aberdeenshire hills as a timeless backdrop. Jim and our children all went to Midmar School. As a family, we've walked the Hill of Fare many times, to Raymoor, to the Queen's Chair, a place of historical significance dating back to 1562. My own journey began when I arrived in Aberdeen aged 13. At school, I read A Scots Quair, and in particular Sunset Song by the renowned author Lewis Grassic Gibbon. That book, set in these very landscapes, brought me closer to this land than I could ever have imagined. Killarley Stone Circle, Barmichan Hill, the village of Echt, the birthplace of Chris Guthrie, Grassic Gibbon's unforgettable heroine, these are not just settings. They symbolise the enduring nature of the land itself. Grassic Gibbon is not just a literary figure, but a cultural touchstone in Scotland. His work reflects and shapes our national identity, language, and social consciousness. The Doric dialect is still honoured in Echt School today, thanks to Jean Baxter, a close friend of Grassic Gibbon's. Her legacy lives on in Doric writing prizes still awarded each year. And that's the kind of heritage we're at risk of losing. A wind farm of this scale will not simply blend in. It will scar the graceful silhouette of these ancient hills. The noise and disruption from blasting, construction, and maintenance will reverberate around us. We already hear the noise of 2 small turbines. What will it be like with 16 massive ones? And of course, once the turbines are in place, more will follow. Pylons, infrastructure, access roads, the industrialisation of the untamed countryside. Film crews have increasingly chosen Aberdeenshire as a setting, including for the film adaptation of Sunset Song. Why? Because of the very landscape we're now discussing. A landscape that speaks of time, of memory, of enduring beauty. Let me close with a passage from Sunset Song, Chris Guthrie's words that express, better than I can, what we're fighting for. And then a queer thought came to her there in the Druid fields, that nothing endured at all, nothing but the land she passed across. Sea and sky and the folk who wrote and fought and were learned, They lasted but as a breath, but the land was forever. You were close to it, and it to you. Ma'am, we ask you today, protect the land, be close to it, and let it remain close to us, unchanged for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have Robin Wersman next.
Madam, respectfully, you already have my other documents. I am a Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society and have been a Chartered Geographer, Chartered Environmentalist and Chartered Member of the Institute of Environmental and Water Management, now retired. I am also a Fellow of the Scottish Society of Antiquaries. My interest is in landscape and prehistory. I have been fortunate enough to be involved in investigation of significant sites across the UK. I have taught sustainability to land economists at Aberdeen University and both public and private potable water production at Robert Gordon University. I have been involved in wind farm planning as a hydrogeologist for over a dozen wind farms, so I understand the role of the applicant. Since June 2025, Scotland has a new landscape charter, authored by 60 organisations. It is important as it lays out a new social contract on what is Scotland's greatest asset, its landscape. I would draw your attention to its aspirations for Scotland's future use of its landscape and the significance to the economy. I would also highlight Aberdeen's port development and associated tourist economy. Last month, 11 cruise ships came with passengers enjoying trips to Deeside, featuring stunning, wild and majestic landscape. The wind farm will negate those descriptors. Our local and almost unique RSC archaeology is also rooted in that landscape. Understanding of them continues to grow through time and new techniques. The Landscape Charter seeks new protections, and I ask for cognizance of it. The other point I wish to make is about water. This summer has shown how we cannot make assumptions about the reliability of supply, especially for locals with private water supplies on Hill of Fare. Many months ago, that water fell as rain on the landscape, usually just enough to provide small local water supplies, peat bodies and burns. We do not have the rainfall of the West Coast to rely on. Private water supplies here are from the very small quantities in fractures in the rock. The nature of that rock here is very important. It is granite, not common in the UK. The crystalline toughness of granite is why it forms hills. But those crystals also give chemical properties to that water. The one very significant word missing from the EIAR is uranium. That has had important ramifications. Uranium being absent means that it has not been addressed by statutory agencies. There is uranium in the groundwater here, very probably also thorium, radon, radium and polonium. 43 households now know the base level of the uranium in their water. It was a very simple testing process. All they had to do was fill a bottle like this from the tap and send it off to an accredited lab in the post. As we have heard, there is also peat on the top of Hill of Fare. Peat is naturally acidic, and if, as proposed in construction, that peat is disturbed, there is potential to increase the groundwater acidity. This will dissolve uranium from crystals in the fine sediments created during construction. We know from other wind farm construction, fine sediment has increased in their groundwater. The increased acidity would raise the soluble uranium to intolerable levels for human and environmental health. At the moment, the levels here are tolerable, but construction will change this. The answer you were not given in the question you asked of matter 11 is there is no realistic economic mitigation for uranium in private water supplies. Thank you.
Thank you, and we're going to hear from Sue and Roy McNaughton.
Roy and I own Burnhead Cottage on the Hill of Fare, and it will become our permanent residence once we retire. We have grave concerns about the detrimental effect of the wind farm on our day-to-day living and our health and well-being. Our cottage is situated 1.8 kilometres from the nearest turbine, T10, one of 28 residential properties within 2 kilometres of the proposed development. Our privately owned cottage, an acre of garden, is surrounded on all sides by Donecta estate land. The people of the Hill of Fare live, work, farm and draw their private water supplies from the hill as they have done for centuries. The Hill of Fare is a small hill, and this wind farm would sit on top of it, visible from many miles away due to the enormous size of its turbines. These turbines will dominate the landscape which lies at the gateway to the Royal Deeside and the Cairngorms National Park. It is currently an area of natural beauty with deep peat reserves, the destruction of which will release vast amounts of carbon to the atmosphere, contravening NPF 4 policies 4 and 11. The visualisations submitted by RES do not convey realistically the potential visual impact of the turbines. During the first public consultation in October 2022, we raised concern with RES that their photograph from viewpoint 4, Brockton, A980, carefully hid T10, the turbine with the biggest visual impact on this side of the hill, behind a small collection of trees beside a cottage. See the top photo. We raised this again in July 2023 when it was clear that they had not rectified this. In their planning submission, for the nighttime shots only, RES used a photo taken from a few metres to the west, which shows T10, but in the dark, see the bottom photo. It clearly shows that RES had a photo they could have used, but they purposefully hid the turbine, which has the biggest visual impact on this side of the hill on their daytime photo montage. The proposal does not adequately address the issue of noise pollution and associated health and well-being impacts for those who live and work on the hill. We are very concerned about low-frequency noise, which is very difficult to suppress or mitigate against. You can't sound insulate against it, and it's louder inside a property than it is outside. RES based their proposal on very out-of-date regulations from 28 years ago. The current nighttime noise level allowed is higher than the daytime level, which will be very difficult for people living on the hill and lead to potential sleep problems and long-term health problems as a result. This is an anomaly relative to current European and overseas standards, which suggests that UK standards are out of date. This reason in itself should be enough to reject the Hill of Fare wind farm proposal. The hill is not just home to people, but to a huge variety of species of birds, animals, insects and reptiles. We enjoy watching red squirrels, pine martens, hares, badgers, roe deers, foxes, crossbills, swallows, owls, migrating geese, buzzards, red kites, peregrine falcons, kestrels, lizards, newts, bats and much more, both in person and recorded on our wildlife cameras. This development will be particularly dangerous for migrating birds, as well as for owls and birds of prey, and will also remove habitat from many others. Deep reserves of peat will be removed, releasing massive amounts of carbon. Trees will be cut down, and 6 quarries will be created to provide hardcore to create roads large enough to cope with the huge vehicles needed to transport the infrastructure elements up the hill. Even RES admits that, quote, it is accepted that some regrading of the land profile would be expected, unquote, thus changing the profile of the hill. This proposal will neither benefit local residents nor the local economy. There has been no offer of beneficial rates offered to locals who would have to suffer the worst of the visual and noise pollution. Neither will it reduce household bills. Octopus Energy reports that already this year, £711 million has been wasted paying wind farms to switch off and not produce electricity. £711 million, which of course is added to consumer bills. The Hill of Fare is not a suitable location for a wind farm of this scale for these reasons and for many others. Fuller explanations have been given in our written objections. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our last speaker is Tim Sibley, who I believe is going to speak and show us a video.
Good evening, ma'am. Yes, I'm last, but not least, I hope. My name is Tim Sibley, and I spend a lot of time cycling with others in Deeside and Donside, with the Hill of Fare as the dominant element of the skyline in our outstanding countryside. Banchory has many cycling groups, and I cycle twice a week with one such group that routinely has 10 plus riders from a membership of 44. My statement today is in the form of this video, which presents the cyclist's views from 3 typical loops from Banchory. Spanning a distance of 20 kilometres east to west, the skyline to the north is always the Hill of Fare. Whether you're a local who enjoys these views every day or a visiting tourist, the Hill of Fare is an iconic and inescapable feature of our landscape that we cannot allow to be destroyed by industrial-scale power generation. Please enjoy the video, and if you can, imagine the tune and lyrics of Caledonia, which captures the spirit of it for me. Thank you for watching.
Okay, thank you very much for everybody who has prepared a statement and a visual that we've heard and seen tonight, and for being here sharing your views in public. There are 2 other people who provided written statements but who haven't been here tonight to present them. That was Jim McLean and Cameron McLean. Both those statements are also on the DPEA website. You can also find the visual materials on the DPEA website. The slides will be on our normal website, and the videos will be on the webcast website as separate clips there. I'll just give a bit of an outline of what happens next in the remainder of the inquiry. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock in this room, we'll be resuming the Landscape and Visual Impact inquiry session, which has been taking place since Thursday morning last week. That should finish tomorrow morning, we expect. There's 2 more hearing sessions this week, one on energy and planning policy and one on conditions. Those sessions both take place here too. We generally start at 10 o'clock in the morning, and what we're going to be doing over Tuesday and Wednesday is begin again with landscape and visual and then run through those sessions consecutively, and we expect to be finished by the end of Wednesday. We may sit on Thursday if we overrun. There are fewer participants in those sessions than today, and they're more technical, but I think they are well worth watching as well. Whether you come in person or you can watch those online, you'll get a perspective on different ways in which the inquiry takes evidence, and many of the issues that people have spoken about today are relevant to considerations of policy and conditions. Once all of the oral sessions are finished, I take final written submissions from the people who've participated in the formal inquiry and hearing sessions People who've spoken today don't have to give a further written submission because you've already given a full version of what you've set out. A couple of people have provided recently an updated version of their statement or asked if they can put in a final version where they've made some tweaks, and you can do that, and that would be saved on file, but you don't have to. The oral version of the presentation you've made will be captured anyway on the webcast website, so that will be on the record. Once all the sessions this week happen, that's when the written statements come in and the formal session, the formal inquiry closes. I then go away and consider all the evidence that's been provided in writing and orally, and get on with writing up my report, basically, for the Scottish Ministers. The target date for me to submit my report to the Scottish Ministers is the 20th of January, but I am hoping to complete my work before that. And once the Ministers come to consider reports such as this, it's not an instant process. It can take quite a few months, so I can't give a firm view on when exactly a decision is likely to be made. So I'd just like to thank you all again for being here tonight, whether as a speaker or observer, and that brings us to the end of tonight's session. Thank you very much.